for me, money is probably the single most important thing in our society to understand, because it drives almost everything that we do, right? We need money to buy the things that we need to survive every day: food, clothing, shelter. Governments need it to spend on infrastructure and to pay public sector workers. Businesses need it to invest in research and development for the future, to trade with other businesses, etc. Right? So it's crucial. It pretty much drives everything that we do in our society. So I want to explain what the money is behind the money system, and I want to explain how that is used to enslave us, and some of its other fundamental flaws: that it must produce ever increasing amounts of debt, that it transfers real wealth inevitably from the poor to the rich, and that it is utterly unsustainable, a scam, a con used to enslave us. So let me start off with how money works. There are three kinds of money. The first one is government money. This one is coins and notes that are in circulation that we're all familiar with. The second kind is commercial bank money. This is made by the high street banks. They create it out of thin air. I'll explain how in just a minute. The third kind is called central bank money. We never see that. Central bank money is held in the Bank of England and is used to settle accounts between the banks at the end of each trading day, right? So first of all, government backed money is fairly easy to explain. It comes into existence by a process known as seigniorage. Up until 1844, excuse me, up until 1844, any bank had the ability to make its own coins and notes, right? And so you had several currencies circulating at the same time. Because that was unstable and unreliable and banks kept collapsing, in 1844 Robert Peel's government decided the Bank of England will be the sole issuing authority for the nation's currency. From that time forwards, all money has been issued by the Bank of England via the Royal Mint. And so the Royal Mint produces notes and coins and then sells those to the high street banks, to the commercial banks, to circulate around society. It costs on average about 3 or 4 pence to print a banknote, and so for a £20 note, the government makes about a £19 and 97 pence profit. About £2 billion, it fluctuates from year to year, but about £2 billion every year is brought into existence. The Royal Mint prints it, sells it to the banks, money goes into the treasury, and that money is spent on the nation. It reduces a little bit the amount of tax the rest of us have to pay. At the moment, there is between 55 and 60 billion pounds of cash money circulating around the economy. It sounds like quite a lot, but actually this represents only about 2.5% of all of the total amount of money circulating around the economy. The other 97.5% of money is created by commercial banks. One other thing. It is important to realise that with government money, with the cash and coin money, this is debt-free. There is no debt and there is no interest attached to this money. It's made, it's bought and sold one time, and then it circulates around, and that's it. It doesn't have any interest due on it, and it's not owed by anyone to anyone. It's been bought and paid for. Commercial bank money, however, is completely different. A commercial banking license gives you, the bank, gives you the ability to create money out of thin air in response to a loan. So somebody goes into a bank, I'm a bank, you're a customer, you come into me, I want to borrow £100,000 to buy a house. I say, sure, no problem. Tap, 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 tap. As if by magic, £100,000 appears in your bank account. Brand new, shiny money, never existed before, right? It's not. Most people seem to think, and quite reasonably, because this is how we all, this is a sensible way to think about money. Most of us think that other savers have their money transferred to the mortgage holder's account. Yeah, they get paid a smaller amount of interest, they pay a larger amount of interest, the bank collects the difference. It's not how it works. With commercial bank money, the money simply comes into existence as if by magic. I'll show you a little bit how it works here. So it's important to understand with commercial bank money that money and debt are the same thing. So money equals debt. I'll come to savings in a minute. Actually, what savings does, savings reduces the amount of money flowing around the economy, and if everybody started saving, we would go into a massive recession, right? But I'll get to that.
Anything about money. I used to work with money for about 25 years.
Excellent. If you don't mind, I'll get to the savings thing in a bit, if you don't mind. Thank you. Right, so someone goes into the bank and borrows £100,000 of money. I'll represent £100,000 with that block right there. They give you £100,000, goes into your bank account. You now owe the bank that £100,000, right? So money equals debt. They give you the money and create alongside it a debt owed to them. This debt now becomes, believe it or not, an asset of the bank. They can count that among their assets because they are owed it, right? Now, whenever you borrow money, there is interest to be paid on that money, right? So there's the £100,000 you borrowed, plus the interest which is going to be due on it. Somebody else comes along and borrows £100,000. I'll just keep it all at £100,000 just for the sake of simplicity. and a new debt is created for another £100,000 with the interest which is due on that, and so on and so on and so on. Now, can you see what's happening here? Every time a new debt is created, the debt is actually larger than the original loan because there's interest due on it as well, right? And so let's say that everybody decides they want to pay off their debts, okay? All of these customers want to pay off their debts. Now, there is a total of £300,000 in money given by the banks, but how much is owed? Maybe 400,000. So that means one of these people can't pay off their debt, right? There is not enough money. There's £400,000 owed, but there's only £300,000 in circulation to pay that debt. And this is one of the main problems with our money system, because 98% of our currency very nearly is this stuff, is this commercial bank money, which is based on debt, and debt carries with it a burden of interest. There is never enough money in the money supply to pay off the debt which is owed. Defaults, bankruptcies are inevitable. It's like a game of musical chairs, right? You got 1, 2, 3 chairs, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 people. It's like musical chairs. You can never, and this is impossible to rectify. This can never be fixed. As this problem gets worse and worse and worse, as the amount of debt gets ever larger than the amount, as this problem gets worse, the interest payments, the interest due gets larger and larger and larger. The only way to cover the interest is to make even more money, and then of course you make even more debt. The problem gets worse and worse and worse. Right now, as of 2010, that was the latest data I can find, global debt is $180 trillion. That's the global debt. The global money supply is about $70 trillion. That means around the world right now, as we sit here today right now, there is over $110 trillion of unpayable debt. It is impossible for that debt, excuse me, ever to be paid off. Right, I've got a couple of other stats here for you. Back in 1945, the ratio of government money, cash and coins, to commercial bank money was 1 to 5. There was 5 times as much commercial bank money as government money. In 1982, that ratio had gone up to 1 to 12. Excuse me. In 2010, that ratio is 1 to 37. So, you know, we've really, the commercial bank money, the funny money, the fictitious money has got out of control. It is now almost 98% of our total money. Right, so there are various consequences to this kind of money system. One, I just mentioned, unpayable debt. It is impossible to ever get on top of that. And the only way to keep up with the interest payments, oh, in fact, sorry, I've got another little stat here. I'll do it as a graph. It's going to be easier to understand if I do it as a graph. Right, so this is in the US money supply versus total debt. I'm going to do two sets of dots here. So money supply is 3, 4.5, 4.5, 5.5, 7.5, 10.5. That's the money supply line right there. This is the debt owed in the US economy. 6.5, 9.5, 11.5, 19.5, 27 and 40. That is how money supply and debt have diverged over the last 50 years. As you can see, the problem's getting worse and worse and worse. As is inevitable, right? It must do that. Commercial bank money in circulation, I'll just do these as numbers, I'm sure you can understand them. In 1870, £500 million was of commercial bank money in circulation. 1939, 3.2, 1970, 25, and then it really starts going up. In year 2000, up to 857 billion, 2005, 1.2 trillion, and 2010, 2.2 trillion. So the money supply is expanding exponentially, but it still can't keep up with the debt burden. The debt races ahead. However fast the money supply grows, the debt burden runs ahead even faster. The second consequence of this is inflation, because you're constantly bringing new money into the supply. There's only 2 ways. That money has to go somewhere, right? There's only 2 ways you can spend that money. Either produce more goods and services in the economy to reflect that threat, or the prices of the existing goods and services must go up. and that's what inflation is. We've been taught that inflation is because of rising prices. No, rising prices is a symptom of inflation, not a cause of inflation. The real cause of inflation is the constantly expanding money supply. That money, all that extra money, has to go somewhere. This is why the housing market keeps going up, why the stock market keeps going up. It's all that bailout money and QE money. That's where it's ended up, is in the property market and in the stock market. What's the problem with inflation? The problem with inflation is that it punishes savers. If you've got money in the bank and you're saving it, as inflation goes up, your savings in real terms go down. And it also means that as prices are constantly going up, people have to work harder just to maintain the same standard of living. And I'll talk more about that later on. The third problem is that it transfers real wealth from the poor to the rich. Obvious, really, when you think about it. Who has the ability to lend money? People who have lots of money, rich people. Who needs to borrow money? People that don't have enough money. Poor people, right? Poor people now pay interest on loans to rich people. And so the gap between rich and poor gets ever wider and wider and wider. And inequality itself, whatever your absolute position in society, the concept, the sense of being unequal, carries with it all sorts of both physical, health and social consequences. In 1960, as another stat for you, in 1960, the top 20% of the people in the world, on average, had 30 times the wealth of the bottom 20% of the people in the world. In 1998, that number had gone up to 74 times. God knows what it is now. I couldn't find the next thing in this, but I can only imagine it's much higher than that. In the US in 2007, the top 1% owned 42% of the nation's wealth. The bottom 80% between them owned 7% of the nation's wealth. You've probably all heard that stat. It's just a few months ago that the richest 8 people in this world now have as much wealth as the poorest 50% of the people in this world now. That was in the news just recently, a month or two ago. And in 1979 to 2007, the average real terms income for the top 1% increased fourfold in the US, while for the bottom 8%, it stayed the same or even went down. For me, the biggest consequence of this is that the banks actually get to determine where the vast majority of money gets spent in our society, right? Because commercial banks are producing 97% of our money supply, and they decide who they lend it to and on what terms they lend it. The banks are actually deciding the direction that society is taking, because they are deciding where money is being invested in our society, right? And so, where did all that quantitative easing and bailout money go? Did it go to lending to new startups, to try out some new businesses, building new hospitals and schools, investing in the energy and transport infrastructure, building social housing, alleviating poverty, homelessness? Did it buggery? It went to inflating the housing market, speculating on stock and foreign exchange markets, and buying more government bonds, right? This is where it actually went, all that free money. So our government produced a whole load of free money for the banks so that they could buy up government bonds and increase their stranglehold over our government's dictate government policies. Oh, it's coming. It's just around the corner, mate. Any day now. I can feel it in my bones. Any day. And if you look at the stock market, it's been reaching record highs. Some $4 trillion every day is traded on the foreign exchange market. Does anyone know what global GDP is? Annual GDP? Anyone? It's about $70 trillion global GDP each year. So in about 3 weeks, the foreign exchange markets are trading the entire global GDP. It's absolutely insane where our financial system has gone. And not forgetting, of course, some of that money had to be paid record bonuses to the very crooks that crashed the system for us in the first place. The fifth and most dire consequence of all is the fact that it creates debt slavery, both on a corporate level and on a government level and on an individual level. If you have the ability to make money, as much money as you want, and lend it to governments in exchange for government bonds, you now have a situation where the population of the country is working to pay tax to the government so that the government can cover its interest payments on the bond, on the loans that it's taken out from the commercial bank. This will stagger you, but it's true. You can check it out yourself when you get home. 90% of our income tax goes to financing interest payments on government loans. 90% of our income tax is not being spent on hospitals and schools and roads and blah, 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 blah. It's being spent on servicing the nation's debt. Staggering, isn't it? I couldn't believe it either, but it's true. Remember, of course, that these debts can never, ever, ever be repaid. So we are doomed to remain in bondage forever until we ditch this stupid fucking system and come up and replace it with something a bit more sensible. On an individual level, there's bondage too. Remember, these bank loans are fictitious. They've made up this money. It's funny money. It's like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. It doesn't exist. It's not real. And yet, you have to repay that loan by going every day to a real job, doing real work, giving up your real time for your real life, of which you only have one, and that's it, right? And they're stealing it from you. Right, and yeah, also, don't forget the bank is taking no risk here. When they lent you that £200,000 to buy your house, they didn't take any risk. It's not their money. They just created it out of thin air and lent it to you. If you default on that loan at any time, most mortgages are 25 years. If you pay 20 years of your mortgage off and then default, they take the whole house from you. Not the unpaid for portion, all of it. So they take the 20 years of payments, plus your deposit, plus the increase in value of the house over the 20 years. They take it all, you end up with nothing. It is daylight robbery, plain and simple. There was a case in 1962 in America. Jerome Daley his bank tried to foreclose on his mortgage. He took them to court and he argued exactly this, that the mortgage was not a legal contract because the bank did not own the money as property in the first place. And the court agreed with him and he was allowed to keep his house. The judge very nicely in his notes afterwards said, sorry, just give me 1 second, said very nicely in his notes afterwards that he agreed that the money did not exist as property, that the bank created it by bookkeeping entry, and added very poetically at the end, only God can create something out of nothing. Have a look when you get home. Jerome Daley versus Scott County, Minnesota, 1962. It's real. The very next day, by the way, the state Supreme Court came in and squashed that decision. No hearing arguments, no waiting for a court date, none of that stuff. But of course, that's the end of the monetary system. Right there in that court decision is the end of the monetary system. So of course, it had to be squashed. So the question now becomes, why? Why is it like this? If this system is so dysfunctional and so poor and so obviously exploitative and ripping off, why does it exist? Why has it been allowed to come into an existence like this? Do any of you remember Tomorrow's World, the TV show Tomorrow's World? Back in the 1960s, Tomorrow's World was predicted that by the year 2000, productivity and automation would have increased to the point where the average family would be able to support itself on the labour of just one worker working only 10 hours a week. And society's biggest problem would be what to do with all of our leisure time. What the fuck happened to that, right? So yeah, the increase in production and the increase in productivity has happened, that has indeed occurred, but we've not benefited from it. All of that has gone up the pyramid to the very, very top of it. It's a deliberate scam. All of this increase in productivity and increase in prosperity has actually done nothing other than increase bank assets. Here's another stat for you. From 1880 to 1965, bank assets were pretty steady at about 40% of the national GDP. In 1991, that had risen to 210%, bank assets, 210% of national annual GDP. In 2008, that was up to 550%. The bank, now this has come about in various different ways. One is privatisation. As we privatise railways, airports, waterworks, etc., etc., it's financial institutions and corporations that are buying those things up. These now become assets. Remember, this is infrastructure paid for and built by the taxpayers of this country, right? Which have now been given over to corporations to run for their own profits. These things they belong to us, they belong to the nation. We are now paying rent on them. Instead of owning them and then being managed for our benefit, we're now paying rent on them so that these corporation shareholders can receive a dividend check every month. Second way that they've done this is by purchasing government bonds. I mentioned this earlier on, but by buying more and more and more government bonds, debt is assets to bank. They buy and sell debts amongst themselves, right? These are assets to the banks. So the more money they can lend, the better it looks on their balance sheet. So they've been vigorously lending money to governments and buying government bonds in exchange. And then the third way is the proliferation of consumer credit. The average household in this country now is in debt. This is excluding mortgages. The average household in this country is in debt now to the tune of over £9,000. As I say, not including mortgages. So the proliferation of cheap credit on credit cards and car loans and financing and so on, all of that is assets to the bank as well. All of that is also money created out of thin air in response to a need for a loan that doesn't really exist, but it now counts as an asset for the bank. I'm here today with the Zeitgeist movement, which are loosely associated with the Venus Project. They advocate a system of a resource-based economy where money is not needed at all, because every member of society has unfettered access to all of the things that they need, and everyone contributes as they are able to or as they wish to, you know what I mean? The one I personally like the idea of is for the government to print a whole bunch of £100 billion notes, go around the banks and say, here you go, we've paid off all of our debts, all of our loans, now fuck off, right? And from now on, we're going to issue our own money. That's what I would like to see personally. Henry Ford put this very well. It's a quote from Henry Ford, the guy that founded the Ford Motor Company. It is just as well that people do not understand the truth of how our system of money works. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before the morning. And he's absolutely right. People truly understand how rapacious